Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to reiterate my thanks to Bill Bobin and to Tom Gemmel for coordinating this talk. When I was first introduced to the story of Barney Ewell, one theme came to mind, and that was this theme of breaking through. I always like to kind of put things into titles as someone who comes from the theater world, and I've written some plays and that sort of thing. So I just kept seeing that title in my head because of the fact that Barney Ewell broke through the tape at the end of every race, but he also broke through so many different barriers, and anyone who knows anything about the story of Barney Ewell knows that. He was born into total poverty, and he would later suffered the barrier of being older than most sprinters of his day because of the barrier of a world war that prevented him from competing in the Olympics during his prime. He also suffered from the barrier of illness that he had to overcome. So that's where the title comes from. And my connection with Barney Ewell is obvious. After Bill's introduction, I too am an alum of J.P. McCaskey High School, like Barney Ewell himself. Interestingly, I was very unfamiliar with Barney Ewell when I was a student there. I was not an athlete, and I did play tennis. Tennis has always been my sport, but it always conflicted with the high school musical, so I was never able to actually compete in sports at McCaskey. But the play that I did at Lincoln Center, interestingly enough, was about the tennis player Bill Tilden. Has anyone ever heard of Bill Tilden? Okay. He was the Babe Ruth of tennis, now largely forgotten, but it's interesting to me that a lot of my creative projects have centered on athleticism, even though I was not an athlete in high school. I just want to talk for just a second about the work that the Alumni Association does, because the Barney Ewell Project was part of our operations at the Alumni Association. We have what's called the Alumni Center on the second floor of McCaskey, and it's kind of an archives, historical archives for the School District of Lancaster, which is the second oldest school district in Pennsylvania, second only to Philadelphia. So alums come all the time to do research, look at our yearbook collection of school newspapers, that sort of thing. Scholarships, we raise money for scholarships. We also resource the libraries with library books. Now that we have 2 McCaskey buildings, we help to fund the libraries at McCaskey. I talked about historical preservation, and we also keep our eyes open for whenever the campus needs help with anything. And you'll see a little bit more a bit later about the kind of campus beautification that we do. Distinguished Alumni is our signature event. Barney Ewell won that award a couple of years ago. We bring back 5 distinguished alums every year to share their wisdom with the current students. And the Alumni Vedette is our magazine that we publish twice a year, and we also do a digital version twice a year. And we do veteran commemorations. This is an example of our most recent project. We just dedicated a plaque in the high school lobby for the 18 young people who left the halls of McCaskey to serve in Vietnam and did not return. And we had a great event welcoming back all of our Vietnam veterans that we could locate, and this is our most recent installation. We're also replacing this weather-worn sign outside of McCaskey with a digital marquee, which is bringing us into the 21st century, and we're doing that very soon thanks to a $20,000 gift from one of our couples that's very close to our Alumni Association. So I just want to get into Barney Ewell here. He was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and one of the most remarkable things about him was after he moved to Lancaster at the age of about 2, when his family moved here to Lancaster, is that he apparently suffered from polio. This is an article that I found when we were researching Barney Ewell, and it does indicate that he had a partially paralyzed left leg. This is his teacher, and I think we're going to hear a little bit more about her in the video I'm going to show, so I won't go into detail about this, but she is someone who had a great influence on Barney Ewell as he became a runner. Her identity was very mysterious to us. We discovered her in a program that was published when he returned from the Olympics. All of his coaches came out to cheer him on when he came home to Stump Field. And she was listed as one of his coaches, his grammar school coach. We couldn't figure out who she was for the longest time, and we finally were able to determine that, and you'll learn more about that in the video. He was a prodigy from the very beginning. Once he started running, he was known as the East Junior High School Flash. That was Edward Hand, is now East Junior High School, now called Edward Hand. And from the very beginning, he was seen as a prodigy throughout Pennsylvania. He was competing with speeds similar to the best collegiate runners when he was just in middle school and junior high. And by the time he got to McCaskey, he was already competing for the Olympics. Interestingly enough, I try to share these things that are lesser known. He did run against Jesse Owens, as you can see from this newspaper article. In 1936, he went to the Olympic qualifying rounds, and as you can see, he came in 4th place. Jesse Owens was number 1. So Jesse Owens ended up going to the infamous Berlin Olympics, where he made so many waves. And what's interesting to me about this piece from the newspaper is that Barney Ewell seems to be the only high school runner in the whole race. They're all from colleges. So if he had been 3rd place, he would have been in that famous Olympics of 1936. He missed it just by a fraction. But Jesse Owens was kind of a hero of Barney's, naturally, and he got to meet him later in life. There's an image of Barney getting some training, perhaps, from his hero, Jesse. When he was in high school, it's remarkable to look at his records, because in his junior year, I've detected that he may have come in 2nd once in his whole career. And also in his sophomore year, I think he came in 2nd place in one of his events, and he did countless events. In his senior year, he did not lose a single event. At every single track meet, he won the 100-yard dash, the 220-yard dash, and the broad jump in every single meet that he was part of. And so that alone, as well as his amazing performance racing against Jesse Owens, got this article in the paper throughout the whole country. Everybody saw this. Lancaster possessed something very special, and he was going to be the heir apparent to Jesse Owens when the Olympics came again. He became the fastest man in the world when he went to Penn State, and he broke the world record in the 50-yard dash, 5.1 seconds. The following year, he broke his own record and got it in 5 seconds flat, breaking his own world record. And this is a piece from the collection of Meredith Colleen, who we've worked very closely with on this project. And she has a remarkable collection, which includes his Olympic medals and also some of these ornate trophies that he won when he was competing overseas. But here we have this individual who is heir apparent to Jesse Owens. He's making headlines around the country as the next great athlete. And the Olympics of 1940 are approaching. Obviously, we know they were canceled because of World War II. He was at a prime age to make waves for himself at the Olympics. He was 22 years old when that's the age that Jesse Owens was. That was the average age for a sprinter at the time that Jesse Owens won his gold medals. So he really missed his chance in 1940. But he served with distinction in the Army, and he was quoted as saying that, winning the war was more important than his athletic career. And he went into the Army, and this did not stop his athletic career. In fact, these are some of his best years. He continued to compete for the Army, on behalf of the Army, representing the American military in numerous meets across the country. He dominated the amateur athletic union meets. When he was at Penn State, he dominated the NCAA. So really, these are some of his best years that he continues to show what an incredible athlete he is, even while doing basic training and all those sorts of things that he had to do in the Army. The Olympics of 1944 were canceled. He was not able to compete. The fastest man in the world was not able to prove himself on the level of the Olympics, which is what so many athletes strive for. And there's a picture of him during his athletic peak. He continued to be the indoor sports star. During these years, he won numerous first-place medals at the Chicago Relays and other indoor meets where he became the king of the 60-yard dash and other indoor events. 1948 comes along. Many people thought that his prime had passed, that there was no hope for him. He had started to lose a lot of races, and people did not take his Olympic aspirations seriously. And people would see him training in Lancaster and think, Barney's never going to make it. You know, it's too bad that he thinks he's going to make it to the Olympics. Not only did he qualify for the Olympic team at the age of 30, he also he matched the world record that had been set by Jesse Owens all those years ago when he was 22. So he did make the U.S. Olympic team, and it was finally his chance. And he was able to brush shoulders with people like Prince Philip. You see him there in that photograph. And there he is later in life showing off the 3 medals that he did win at the Olympics, 2 silver and 1 gold. He became known around Lancaster upon his return as just kind of a man about town. People liked him. He loved to talk to people, get to know strangers. And although he lived in the Southeast, he was always seen downtown at Central Market and in the middle of the city. And many people know and remember him from those days. One of the great ironies of his life is that the very thing that propelled him to international fame, his legs, were taken from him due to complications from diabetes. This is an article from the paper the month before he passed away. And he was laid to rest at Conestoga Memorial Park Cemetery, which is a veterans cemetery in Lancaster. So, the Barney Ewell Project. I was approached by Art Morris and Ken Stout a couple of years ago, and we all collectively came together and said, something more needs to be done to revive this man's legacy, especially for the current students of McCaskey, so many of whom were completely unaware of his athletic prowess. So we started to brainstorm and think, how can we revive this man's legacy? It happened that we formed our committee around the time that was the 100th anniversary of his birth. So we decided to hold a week-long celebration in Lancaster known as Barney Ewell Week. And it was declared Barney Ewell Week by the mayor of Lancaster as well as the county commissioners. At this press conference that we held that you just saw a photo of, we curated an exhibit of his memorabilia, including the gold medal that you see there. And this is the Barney Ewell Legacy Committee. Essentially, Ron Ford to the left, Ken Stout is next to him, Barney's children, Denise Ewell and Patrick Ewell, and on the right is Art Morris. We held listening and gathering sessions where we got together with members of the community. We advertised these sessions and invited members of the community to come share their memories of Barney Ewell, share their stories, and get their feedback about what we could do to properly honor Barney Ewell in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So those were very interesting events where we got a lot of good information and good biographical information about Barney Ewell as we decided to piece together his story. And as I said, February 18th through the 25th was Barney Ewell Week in Lancaster. We noticed that he had spent most of his life at 55 Green Street in Lancaster, and there wasn't much in that area to commemorate the fact that this great Olympian had lived in this neighborhood for so many years. We discovered this parklet at the corner of Pershing Avenue and Green Street, very close to Barney Ewell's home, and we noticed that there was a perfect location for some informational panels. So we installed these panels just to let people in the community know that Barney Ewell, the great Olympic sprinter, had once lived not far from this commemorative panel. And this is a video from some of the news coverage that we got. We did a number of free events. One of them was at Lancaster train station where a huge crowd welcomed Barney Ewell home from the Olympics.
Well, during the 2018 Winter Olympics and his 100th birthday, gold medalist Barney Ewell was celebrated at the Lancaster train station today, declaring this week as Barney Ewell Week in Lancaster. News 11's Taylor Toship was there for the celebration.
It was a triumphant return from Lancaster native and Olympic gold medalist Barney Ewell as he made his return home from the London Summer Games, greeted by hundreds of people at the Lancaster train station 70 years ago.
Right here in the train station is where there was a youth celebration when he came back from the Olympics.
Just days away from what would be his 100th birthday, and during the 2018 Winter Olympic Games, the week of February 17th was named Barney Ewell Week in Lancaster.
That we can call him around, because in this day and age there aren't too many role models that we can be proud of. So I think it's important today we're here to celebrate Barney Ewell Week.
While he was breaking records in London and labeled the fastest man on earth back in Lancaster County, he was inspiring those that crossed his path. At first, not knowing she was in the presence of an Olympian, graduate of McCaskey High School, Lisa Weaver's brief moment with Barney left a lasting impact.
It sparked something in me as a human being of knowing yourself but not needing to prove yourself. But he was a hero right there, and he had everything he needed to be a perfect human being.
Barney's longtime neighbor and babysitter to his children, Betty Hurdle, was also in attendance.
He was our action figure. He was our star because he was an Olympic champion.
During the years she knew Barney, he was never boastful about striking gold at the Olympics, but is happy to see he is getting the recognition he deserves.
It wasn't honored the way it should have been, and I'm so glad to see now, with his 100th birthday, that we can have this celebration and celebrate him. He would be very pleased. He'd be very humble.
Reporting in Lancaster, Taylor Tasha, News 11.
Barney Ewell Week ended with a big gala at LancasterHistory.org, who had been a very close partner with us on this project. And we showed a film which I produced with the help of my committee, and it's called Breaking Through, the Barney Ewell Story. And I'm just going to show you a brief bit of that film right now.
100 meters dash, first trial heat with Barney Ewell, USA, Lang of Jamaica, McCaskey of Great Britain, Jacona of Malta, and Lipsky of Poland. On their marks, set, and they're off. Barney Ewell taking the lead, and McCaskey of Great Britain close on his heel. At the tape, it's Ewell first, McCaskey second, the time 10.5 seconds. On the marks are Ewell, Bailey, Corona of Australia, Lewis of Trinidad, Goldman of Hungary, and Clausen of Iceland. They're away to a good start. Again, it's a duel between Bailey and Barney Ewell. Corona of Australia closes ground in the final strides, but Ewell wins again. In the final are 6 of the world's greatest sprinters. On the marks, set, and they're off.
Following the 100 meters dash final at the 1948 Summer Olympics in London, Barney Ewell performed a victory dance. He would quickly discover that his teammate, Harrison Dillard, had beaten him to the tape. A sliver of a second had stepped between Ewell and the gold. Time, it would seem, is not always on the side of the fastest man in the world. He was born Henry Norwood Ewell on February 25th, 1918, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
In 1917-18 is when they had the great migration from the south, coming up to Harrisburg to take African Americans took jobs in the steel mill and the railroad.
The Ewells had come to Harrisburg from a town called Thoroughfare, Virginia, originally settled by freed people of color following the Civil War. African Americans, Native Americans, and others of mixed ancestry. After moving to Harrisburg, Barney's father Edward worked in nearby Steelton in the steel mill.
I just remember his father. People said that he could run faster backwards than some people could run forwards. That was the father. So it was in the genes.
It was on the other side of the railroad tracks from the Central District, on Balm Street, that Ewell took his first nimble steps.
In the 1920s, the area that Barney Ewell lived was an area where a lot of African American professionals lived. School teachers, doctors, lawyers, music teachers, piano teachers. So it was one of the great African American neighborhoods in 1920.
When Norwood, as they called him, was still a tot, the Ewells moved to the city they would forevermore call home. Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
When we look at the county in the 1920s, about 90% of all African Americans lived in the 7th Ward. It was a working class area, multicultural.
People were poor, and they got along well together, and they kind of stuck together. Here on the streets of Lancaster, earning money shining shoes, young Norwood Ewell was often heard singing a song based on a popular comic strip, a tune he would carry with him for years to come.
I remember him singing that song from Barney Ewell. I guess that's where he got his nickname from, Barney.
Coincidentally, Barney grew up not far from what was known as Barney Google's Row.
As I recall, it was unpaved, and they were just block houses.
And I remember seeing two boards nailed together like this, the rain fell. The rain would come down into a barrel. And they got the water. Barney's father was employed as a waiter at Lancaster's Hamilton Club. Years later, Barney's wife would encourage their children to never forget what he came from.
She would always say, well, you appreciate how far we've come, because your daddy was poor. He was poor, he was always scratching out for a nickel.
It is not only poverty that sets the stage for Barney Ewell's story. His boyhood was also marked by illness, as when he contracted typhoid fever. But the first great irony that would define this life was polio. At the peak of his coming athletic career, it would be reported that one of the two primary factors that propelled him to international fame, his left leg, had been partially paralyzed by the disease. It was in an effort to overcome this hardship that he took up running. It healed his leg and brought to light his extraordinary ability. Barney attended grammar school at Lancaster's South Duke Street School, where his great talent was discovered by his teacher, a daughter of Romanian Jewish immigrants, Sadie Harlow. She encouraged Barney in his recovery and coached him in his first race, a 75-yard sprint. He would never forget her, and she would remain a motivational force in his life for years to come.
Maybe her maternal instinct knew that he was special. If he did,
If you want to see the rest of this film, it's available for free on YouTube. So you just type in "Breaking Through the Barney Ewell Story" and it'll come right up. Incidentally, Harrison Dillard, who you saw interviewed in this video, just passed away 4 days ago or so. He was 96. It was a real honor to get in my car and just drove to Cleveland. I called him up, found his number online, and he was very kind to welcome me into his home and be interviewed for this. So I'm really grateful that I got a chance to meet him. One thing we did after the Barney Ewell week was over was we dedicated a state historical marker to Barney Ewell right outside of McCaskey High School. It was dedicated around this time last year. That's Randy Harris there, two from the left, that's Randy. He was a consultant, two from the right, excuse me. He was a consultant on this project, and he did a lot of work to help us along the way. Of course, we found out that Lancaster Square was being renamed and redeveloped. We had for a long time the feeling that although we had held Barney Ewell Week, that something more should be done to create a lasting legacy for him. It was a wonderful week-long event that we had, but we wanted to try to create something more permanent to honor him in a more lasting way. So we talked about having a bronze statue of him somewhere in Lancaster. So when this opportunity arose, we set to work again. We held a press conference at the Imperial Restaurant, which is the old site of the Brunswick Hotel. It was an appropriate site to kind of launch this effort because of the fact that Barney had been welcomed home from that location when he came back from the Olympics. People lined the streets welcoming home his motorcade. And he also was sent off to the 1984 Olympics by our community, who raised a lot of money to send he and his wife Duella to enjoy the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. So we set to work just trying to gain public support for this effort. There was a poll released in LNP, which asked Lancastrians who they would like to see the square named after. Many people did say Barney Ewell, as you can see. But we set to work to really talk to as many organizations and groups as possible and individuals to gain support that we could then present to the Public Art Board, who was making the decision, and hope that things would go our way. And of course, Lancaster Square was renamed for Barney Ewell in August. And we hope next to have a bronze statue of him in Lancaster, hopefully in the square. But that's something that we really have on our minds because we want to make sure that his legacy is a permanent one in Lancaster. That was our goal when we started out. And so that's really our next project. So at this time, I just want to ask if anyone has any questions for me. Thank you. Don't be shy.
You didn't comment, maybe it's not an issue, was there any racial discrimination issues that you researched? I mean, you haven't talked about that, which is fine, I'm just curious.
I think, that's something that I brought up to our committee when we first started working on this project. And I have a certain level of naivete about that, of course. But when I brought it up to people like Ron Ford and Meredith Colleen, who's African American herself, they kind of laughed and said, "Are you kidding me?" And Ron said, "I think the answer to that is obvious," and he was right. I mean, when I look at the way he was written about in the papers, the derogatory ways that he was spoken about, he most certainly faced discrimination. He wanted to be a teacher, I'm aware of. That's something that came up in my research. Had aspirations to be a coach. He had a phys ed degree from Penn State. There were no teachers of color in Lancaster in those days. It just didn't happen. So, did he face problems that got in the way of his opportunities in that department? Absolutely. I'm sure there are many thousands of stories I could tell, but we wanted to focus on mainly his athleticism, and who knows, down the road, I would love to be able to paint a broader portrait of who this person was. If you watch any great documentary, you're going to see what their struggles were, you're not just going to see the rosy side of things. And that does come up in my documentary a little bit. Jesse Owens, when he came back from the Olympics, track and field was not at the time at least very conducive to coming from poverty. If you were a professional football player, there was more money in that, I assume. And so people like Jesse Owens came home and they took these lucrative commercial deals. Companies would come to Jesse Owens and say, "Will you promote our product?" And he did that, and because he did that, he lost his amateur standing. So he was not able to, his career was over, basically, because you had to compete as an amateur. The exact same thing happened to Barney Ewell. The community raised a lot of money to buy him a home for his family when he returned to Lancaster. And because he was given that home, they took away his amateur status. And whether or not he wanted to keep going, I don't know. He was 30 years old, but he did continue and he became a professional. And that's when he did a lot of his running overseas and won lots of world titles.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Dave Falk, fellow alumnus. Congratulations on a great story and a great project. If I may, I'll share a brief family story about Barney Ewell that I only learned a few years ago. One of my late uncles from Lancaster and Barney worked together for many years at the Armstrong Floor
smartest guy Barney raced.
Hi, Jeremiah.
Hi, Randy.
It's good to see you. Can you tell us more about the project itself, what you anticipate the costs will be? Is there going to be a community effort to do fundraising, et cetera?
I have a clipboard up here, and if anybody would like to give me their information, if anyone is interested in working with us on this project going forward, you're more than welcome to come to me and we'll take down your information. These talks have just gotten started. I think we're having our first meeting on this topic this Friday. So we're just not there yet. But we know, we've talked in a vague way about costs. We have maybe a rough estimate. But you know, there are a lot of factors we need to think about. It depends on who does it. Yeah. So, but certainly we will take your information, and if you're interested in keeping in touch with us about the project and getting some updates, and also if you're interested in helping us, we would be more than grateful to have your information.
Just to follow up